Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and today we're back with another Riotoro product. Today we're going to be taking a look at the very odd but pretty cool Riotoro CR1088 mid-tower case. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so if you're a regular viewer of this channel, you'll notice that I do get a lot of Riotoro products, primarily because they're good quality, good prices, and I kind of like the company and their ethos. So that's that out of the way. Let's take a look at this case and see what the specs, features, and downsides are of this little case. Now, first of all, let's look at the front. Now, this case, actually, believe it or not, is capable of taking full-size ATX motherboards, but it's actually quite small. In fact, height-wise, it's probably not much bigger than the Fractal Define Mini. So that gives you some idea of the size. Now, the full specs of this you can find in the description below, and I'll put a link to Riotoro so you can check it out for yourself there. Their measurements will be far more accurate than my guesstimation, so I suggest you check it out there before you make any purchases. But anyway, I digress. So the front panel. Now, the front panel is mesh both sides, and you've got the Riotoro logo and also a illuminated RGB strip down the front, which runs along the top and down the sides as well also. Now, don't worry, I will be powering this up later so you can see what the RGB is actually like. But first of all, I'm just going to do a quick spin round just to show you what the case is like, the insides, the outs. We're going to take it all apart, have a complete strip down, and then at the end, I'll put a power supply in and show you what the lights are like. Now, there isn't going to be a build in this video. That is going to be coming up in the future. This is the planned upgrade path for the rebuilt pink PC we did in a previous video, which you can check out up here somewhere. But anyway, yeah, the build will be happening in the very near future. This is purely a kind of intro and a walk around. So let's go around to the back side. Now, on the back side, you've got a metal panel, which is actually quite a stiff panel, so that's a good sign. You've got a ventilation port there with a magnetic dust filter behind there, and that is the mounting area for the power supply behind there. So this chassis is split into two sides, so one for the motherboard and all those kind of things, all the things that look nice, and on this side for all the stuff that doesn't look so nice, so you can just stash it all out of the way and not have to worry about it too much, which I think is a pretty great idea. So let's move around to the back. So on the back, you've got a upside down ATX orientation, so your PCI Express expansion slots are going to be at the top, your motherboard I/O at the bottom, and just here you've got room for a small fan, which, to be fair, is probably a useless thing to have there. I can't imagine anyone populating that, but at least it's some form of ventilation, which is a good thing. On this side, you have the mounting hole for your ATX power supply. Now, this will take any size ATX power supply because there's a massive amount of room inside this side section, so you can put any power supply you want in there. I'm going to be going with the Riotoro 600 watt builder edition, which is, again, is going to be a perfect solution for this case. You've got a little bit more ventilation at the top here, so obviously anything in there hard drive wise, which are going to be in this side, any heat is going to be allowed to pass through at the top. So not choked, which is a good start. We like cases that aren't choked of airflow, unlike some of the Cooler Master ones we've been seeing recently. Anyway, let's move on. So onto the showpiece side, which is a acrylic side panel, not tempered glass, it is acrylic. So obviously it is prone to things like micro scratches and things like that, so you will have to be relatively careful with it. It's quite a thick acrylic, but there's quite a few angles on there, so you may have to be careful where you put it down if you're doing a build. Make sure you put it on something nice and soft so as not to damage it or scratch it. So that is the side panel. So that takes us back around to the front. Now, on the bottom of the chassis, you have a large ventilation area, very similar to the InWin series of cases where they have bottom ventilation. So in here you can put in probably two 120mm fans quite easily in there. They don't mention anything about putting radiators in there. You possibly could get a 240mm radiator and case fans in there, but then you wouldn't be able to use a full-size ATX case, full-size ATX motherboard. If you went with micro ATX, that would give you the room, so that would be perfect. Moving around to the top of the case, Now on the top of the case, you've got a ventilation grill on the top, which again, inside there is a magnetic air filter or dust filter to prevent anything either coming in or going out. It will allow hot air to kind of trickle out, but there's no fan mounting options there, which is a shame actually. It would have been nice to have seen a 120mm fan option there, but that is quite a common thing with Riotoro cases. They don't tend to have top mounted fan mounts, but they do have ventilation, so some ventilation is better than nothing. Now moving up towards there, you've got your I/O panel. So on the I/O panel, moving from this side, you've got the power button. Next to that, you've got the RGB control button, which we'll get onto more later on in the video. There's a microphone port, a headphone port, a hard drive LED indicator, 2 USB 3.0, no USB 2s on this, which is actually a really nice thing to see. It's about time that we've started to lose USB 2. That is a great addition and also a great omission. USB 2 is kind of dead really these days. USB 3 is the way to go. It's a shame it didn't have USB-C, but again, this case is aimed probably more so at your kind of system integrators rather than enthusiasts. So USB-C possibly not that necessary at this kind of price point. So moving across, you've also got a reset switch. Now all of this surround is actually RGB as well. So this will light up in conjunction with the front strip, the Riotoro logo, and also it's got the ability so you can add a magnetic RGB strip inside as well. Again, we'll go into that a little bit more in detail when we get inside the case. But a lot of RGB and it all will be synchronized, which is great. So this is the acrylic side panel, and as you can see, it's kind of like a grey smoke tint to it, which you can probably just about make out against the white of the desk. So it's not the kind of like browny bronzy colour, which I actually dislike. It's quite a nice colour. So it's not completely transparent, so it will give you kind of a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to doing your build and trying to make it look as nice as possible. But also because it's a little bit of a tint to it, it will hide up any nasties. Okay, so looking inside the case, this is the mounting area for the motherboard. So you've got full-size ATX compatibility there, and you've got a lot of area there to install your motherboard. Even full-width boards is not going to be a problem, so eATX is going to be absolutely fine. Plenty of areas for routing cables through. Now obviously because this motherboard is going to be installed upside down, you kind of have to rethink your cabling. So traditionally you'd have all of your I/O at the bottom. So now that's all going to be at the top, which again is another good thing because all the wires are traveling along the top anyway, and there are grommet holes which you can put all the wires through, so it should make for a really nice and tidy build. Now on the bottom, again where you've got the mounting area for the 120mm fans, you've also got this magnetic removable dust filter. So if you've got a case with either negative pressure or positive pressure, either side of it is going to get dusty, but that makes it nice and easy to remove and clean. Now obviously if you want more airflow, as in passive airflow, then you could leave these filters off and just allow the hot air to rise through, and obviously convection is going to draw cold air in through those open vents, which again, it's a PC, the options are entirely up to you. You can do pretty much whatever you want with it, but I can see some people would be tempted to put a radiator in there possibly, and some 120mm fans which you've got mounting areas for, so it's no problem at all. So go around to the other side, just take off the other panel. And this is the business side. This is where your power supply is going to go, and your hard disk drives, SSDs, all that kind of thing. Now this area here is all removable, so you've got the option in there to put 2 3.5-inch drives and 2 2.5-inch drives, all of which are held in place with these removable sleds. So nice and easy to manage and maneuver drives if necessary. There's a 3.5 and a 2.5 on this side, and on the other side of this unit, which I will take out. The funny thing is this unit is actually on thumb screws, but because of where the thumb screws are, it's actually a little bit difficult to get to. Some of you may find it nice and easy. I find it quite difficult, so I'm going to use a screwdriver. Okay, so this is the hard drive and SSD mounting bracket, whatever you want to call it. So you just push the connections in and the drive sleds will come out pretty easily. So again, you've got 4 sleds in total. They all live on this bracket, which is quite a nice idea. So you can get all your drives populated onto the bracket, and then put it in the machine, do all your cabling, all that kind of stuff. So actually, while I'm at it, let's have a look inside this box. So this is our accessory box. I haven't looked in here yet, so I'm not sure what is going to be in here. So we've got a selection of cable ties, which is always a nice thing to see on a case when you're doing a build. And it's also actually the quite small thin cable ties, so I quite prefer those rather than the big thick ones, which can leave kind of quite nasty edges on them. Anyway, I digress. So in this bag is mounting pillars and motherboard mounting screws. Now in this bag, actually, that is a really nice thing to see. You've actually got the longer type screws for mounting radiators and longer fans into the front section or on the bottom section. So if you are putting radiators in, these will pass through the radiator and into the fan to secure it all in place. It's a really nice feature, and you get 8 of those, so obviously to mount 2 fans. Or you could do what I normally do and just use a couple of screws in each one and mount 4 fans. Okay, so let's have a look a little bit further into what is going on behind the hard drive caddy. So in between the hard drive caddy, there's this plastic cover which covers up your RGB controller. Now the RGB controller is also a fan controller. Well, I say fan controller, it will supply power to fans. There isn't any option to control any of the speed of the fans that are connected to this module. Now it's actually covered up, so let's get a screwdriver on that and I will take it apart. Now in the interest of transparency, I have actually taken this apart already and I have tidied up some of the wiring just to make it a bit easier for you guys to see. So there we have the RGB controller, which is mounted here. So all of the RGB devices in the chassis, such as the side panel, the Riotoro illumination on the front, the top piece, all of it goes back to this unit here and is powered by a single SATA connection, which is a great thing to see. There's no Molex involved. I do applaud you, Riotoro, for that. So the controller itself has got options there for various devices to be connected. Now it has actually got the ability, I've plugged in one fan already, which is the fan which is included as standard on the front, which is a single fan. It isn't RGB sadly, it's just a normal 3-pin 120mm fan. So I've connected that into this connection here. So that doesn't have to be connected to the motherboard, which, considering the motherboard we're going to be using in this, which only has one PWM output on it, this is actually going to be a lifesaver, I think. So anyway, I'm digressing again. So this controller, all the bits plug into it. You can add in another 1, 2, 3 fans, so 4 fans in total. And it's also got 4 RGB outputs for those fans. Now, from what I can tell, that is only compatible with the Riotoro Prism fans, which I'll put a link to in the description below. It's not a normal 4-pin RGB connection. It has got 4 pins, but it's a different type connector. So it's possible you could modify the connections to make it work with this, but I would probably recommend just going for the Riotoro ones just to keep it simple and make sure there's no damage done. Now speaking of damage done, there is actually an output on this controller for a RGB fan, such as the magnetic ones you can pick up quite cheaply. Now there was a plastic cover on there which I lost somewhere, so I put a little bit of black tape on there so it didn't short out. But so that effectively you can connect to another RGB device, be it a strip or whatever it may be. So I was going to run that up through the top of the case and then put the strip into the other side to illuminate the side with the acrylic glass on, which I think is going to look really nice. Obviously this doesn't come with a magnetic strip out of the factory, so you would have to provide your own or just leave it capped if you don't lose the cap like I did. So that's the RGB controller. When I power it up in a minute, I'll show you how that RGB controller works from the RGB button on the top. Now in some of the documentation I've seen for this particular case and some of the reviews I've seen, they have mentioned that the RGB can be controlled by RGB compatible motherboards. Now I've actually spoken to Riotoro UK and US to find out what the deal is with that, because I've had a very good look at this controller and they actually do provide quite a detailed schematic of how the controller is actually wired up and how to use it and all that kind of thing, which I'll try and get you a close-up of if I can. But there's a really good schematic there. It tells you what all the connections are on the chip itself and on all the cables, so if you disconnect anything it's quite easy to reconnect. But there isn't, from what I can see, an input of any sort to control the RGB. So again, If I get a result back from Riotoro to clarify that, I will put it in the description, or if it's in time for the editing of this video, then I will add it on at the end. But as far as I can tell, the only way of controlling the RGB from this controller is by the RGB button on the top, and also on the back of the controller there is a simple push button which basically emulates what the RGB button is doing. But that is only accessible from the rear. You can get to it through the holes in the back of this chassis, so you could put a screwdriver or something in there to change the colours if you wanted to. Why you would, I don't know. But obviously if the button does stop working for any reason, there is a warranty with the case, so you could replace it. But if you didn't want to replace it because you got all your stuff in there, you can always use the button on the back. So that is pretty much everything from inside the case. I think we've covered pretty much everything. Now the front panel actually will come off, and behind it you can see where the fans are mounted, which I will take off now. Okay, so the case front itself, you can see it's actually really thick, sturdy plastic. I was surprised, it's actually really strong. Now, as well as having a metal mesh on the front, there's also as well a kind of a lightweight foam on the back. So the filtration is actually going to be really good on this, and it'll be nice and easy to clean because all you'll need to do is get a vacuum with like a nozzle attachment or the brush attachment and just give it a vacuum on the front. There's no kind of taking filters in and out all the time, which for me is actually a bit of a godsend, because I do get a bit tired of taking filters out and cleaning them, then putting them back in and drying them, whereas it's quite easy just to do your household chores, get the vacuum on it, and it's job done. Actually, while I got this out, you can see the wiring. So the wiring for the RGB, 2 lots. So one for the RGB for the Riotoro logo, which is there, and the other cable which goes to the light which goes around the outside of the front panel. All good. So if I rest that on there, hopefully that won't scratch it. This is about to go wrong. So as you can see on the front now, so that is the kind of, I think that must be a 60mm or maybe an 80mm at the most fan option there to make up for the one on the back as well. And you've got pass through so you can run wiring through, etc, etc. You've got the mounting area for the fan on the front. As you can see, I've got a Riotoro one in there at the moment. You can populate it with another one in there. Options there if you want to. So that is pretty much it for the sort of look around. So let's power it up, get some electricity going to it, and take a look at the RGB goodness that is inside. Okay, so there we go, we've got our Riotoro power supply installed now, the Builder Series 600W, which is connected to a power supply tester, so I didn't have to put a full system in here, just so you can get an idea of what this is going to look like with the RGB lights on. So this is with it currently in the blue configuration. Now the RGB is super simple to control, like really simple. All you need to do is press the RGB button, and it cycles through the colours until you get to the 256 colour mode, which is like a flow version, so that'll go through the various colours of the cycle, of the spectrum rather, and when you get to a colour you particularly like, if you press the RGB button again, it will pause it on that colour, and then even if you turn the case off, turn the power supply off, etc, etc, when you turn the PC back on, it will remain in this colour. So if you've got a colour set up in mind, you can program it to that and forget about it, that's it, completely done. Press the button again, and you go back through the cycle. So the cycle has red, green, blue, white, yellow, pink, and then the cycle. Now if you don't like any of those colours, then frankly you probably shouldn't be buying this case, but you can press and hold the button, the RGB button, and it will turn the RGB off in its entirety. PC will remain on, doesn't involve the power supply at all switching off, it just turns off all the RGB. Now if you want to turn it back on, press and hold the button again for a few seconds and your RGB will come back on. Couldn't be much simpler, could it? So I'm actually really impressed with this. All the RGB matches up quite nicely, and if you can see on the sides, you've got the RGB on the side, you've got the front on the other side as well, and also the buttons on the top are also illuminated in the same colour, so it's all nice and matching, all put together, which I like. I think this is a really good case. Now you can put any size motherboard you want in there. ATX isn't a problem, you've got plenty of width there in the chassis itself. Lots of cabling options, lots of cooling options, pretty much does it all. So what are your thoughts on it? I really like it. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. Riotoro are not a particularly well-known brand in the PC sort of building community and that kind of thing, but they are starting to make a name for themselves and coming out with some really cool products. So again, let me know what you think in the comment section below. But in the meantime, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and this has been the pretty darn good Riotoro CR1088. Thanks for watching.